This session is one of my favorite when we get to the point to be able to explore stress physiology. Okay, there's a lot of connotations and mixed understanding around what stress physiology is. And you may have been told that your back pain or your neck pain is, you've had it ruled out by your doctor, and maybe you've been given the description that it's down to stress. And that's something that could well be true, but in my experience, it's a difficult leap for a lot of people to be able to tangibly say, you know, my back's hurting, my knee's hurting. What do you mean I'm stressed? I'm not stressed. Certainly would be my response. And that's where being able to look at stress physiology really helps to be able to make some of those connections. And that's what we're going to do today. And that's going to have tangible impact on what you action with your healthcare professional, which may be me, or it could be a clinician that's supporting you through this program, to be able to put into action the concepts that we are talking about. But before we do that, I'm going to share a short video of one of my great inspirations in my learning journey around health, and particularly around stress physiology, which you won't have heard of probably. If you have, then awesome. His name is Robert Sapolsky, and this short video is going to kick this session off. I'm going to screen share. And we will pull it back together after Robert Sapolsky's little spiel around the evolution of religion.
So when you look at the really unique, bizarre things humans have come up with, ranging from cave paintings to Snapchats and everything in between, probably the most unique and universal thing we've come up with is this religion business. When you talk about symbolic, metaphorical thinking, essentially there has been no culture on earth that has not invented some form of what could be termed meta-magical thinking, attributing things that cannot be seen, faith-based belief systems, things of that sort. It's universal. 90-95% of people believe in some sort of omnipotent something or other out there. Every culture out there has it. People have endlessly speculated about the evolution of religiosity, and at least in terms of westernized religions, it makes perfect sense why they've evolved, because they're wonderful mechanisms for reducing stress. It is an awful, terrifying world out there where bad things happen and we're all going to die eventually. And believing that there is someone responsible for it, at least gives some stress-reducing attributes built around understanding causality. If on top of that, you believe there is not only something out there responsible for all of this, but that there is a larger purpose to it, that's another level of stress-reducing explanation. If then on top of it, you believe that individual out there is benevolent, even more so, control and predictability. Benevolent and listens to human entreaties, more elements of control. Benevolent listens to human entreaties and prefers to listen to people like you, who look like you, pray like you, request like you. Even more so, they're just all of these levels of control, predictability, they're stress reducing. And what is infuriating to me as an utter complete atheist is a very, very solid literature showing the health benefits of religiosity, independent of you tend to get a social supportive community when you're religious, you have fewer lifestyle risk factors. The mere ability to perceive causality, reason, benevolence especially for people like me, if I say the right combination of words and fervently believe in it, that's wonderfully protective and there's health benefits to it. If it is a totally heartless, indifferent, apathetic universe out there, you are far more at risk for all the logical things, which is to conclude it is an utterly depressing universe out there. Rates of depression are much higher among atheists, go figure. So in terms of that, it makes perfect sense why this is something that people have come up with. And rather than asking why is it that 95% of humans come up with some form of religiosity, much more biologically interesting question to me is what's up with the 5% of atheists who don't do that?
My name is Scott.
That's Robert Sapolsky, who you probably haven't heard of because he is a professor out of Stanford University in America. And he is one of the most interesting people, I believe, on the planet. And he was a big inspiration of my understanding of stress physiology because he's one of the leading authorities in the world around how we've come to understand how stress impacts our health. And one of the reasons he's so interesting is because, you know, he's in his 60s now, but from the age of 30 through to 50 something, he'd live in Africa with tribes of monkeys, actually, to be able to live with them, study them, and be able to devote his entire career to being able to study primates and then be able to investigate how different hierarchies and behaviors ultimately to be able to give us our current understanding of stress, which is what I'm going to try and get across in this session. Is some things that are otherwise quite complex that you may have heard some of the concepts I'm going to bring up. But the most important thing is understanding what our stress physiology has evolved and designed to do for us, because it's another one of our protective systems like pain. And as you're sat there now, wherever you may be watching this, all of your bodily systems that are designed to protect you and enable you to carry out all your daily functions, your cardiovascular system, your respiratory system, your immune system, all of these systems are nice and imbalanced and chilled out. But I'm going to disrupt your day for a second and imagine that an African lion has just came in through your doorway. A big, roaring male African lion. And I'm going to ask you in layman terms to simply tell me what is your first reaction or what might you do. What you're probably going to be thinking along the first lines, or if I was to tell you what I would do, I would probably scream, a bit like my man in the image is doing here. I might try and run away if it's possible. I'm in a room and I can't get away, so I'm going to maybe try and fight it. That may be a bad idea and I may lose, but if you were able to think of something similar there, you're probably going to have had something similar come to mind, and in doing so, you are able to describe something called the fight or flight response. Okay, and that is everything in your nervous system, everything in your body is kicking into action to be able to protect you. So your heart rate would have just increased, your breathing will have increased, your eyes will have dilated to be able to see the threat, increase blood, increase breathing, get it all to your muscles to be able to run away or fight the lion. And that is exactly what happens to be able to save us. We have evolved this fight or flight stress physiology to enable us to survive in a situation like that. And what I'd also like you to think about is, while you probably just described that you'd scream, you'd run away, maybe you'd fight it, would be what your body isn't prioritizing in that time. And I'll guide you through some suggestions. You know, would this be an appropriate time for you to go to sleep? Probably not. So that system is going to be not prioritized right now. There's a lion chasing us. What about your immune system? Are you going to be prioritizing a virus that's maybe got into your system, or the healing of a cut on your leg? Probably not. That's not going to help us get away from the lion. It's not going to save our life. So our body's going to not prioritize that. Okay, what about digestion? Is it going to be appropriate for our nervous system to be digesting the breakfast you just ate? Probably not. That can again be dealt with later. Blood needs to get from my digestive system out to my muscles, where I need to be able to fight it or run away. Okay, so digestive system is not going to be important. Is it a good time to be horny? That's probably not going to lead to us saving our lives. So libido is going to be put onto the back burner. And another one I'll add on to the list there would be my knee pain or my shoulder pain, my shoulder injury that I've been dealing with. At this point in time, am I going to feel and experience pain? Probably not. and we've talked about some other sessions, how we can have tissue damage but change so that we can actually not have a pain experience by simply changing the context. So what we just described there, or what you just described there, is by just intuitively what you would do when you're in a life-threatening situation like a lion chasing you, would be kicking into action all the appropriate systems that are designed to protect you. And we just described that. Your heart rate and your breathing is going to go up. Need that to protect you. Your immune system, that's not important. We can put that off. Libido, again, not important. Digestive system, not going to be important. Sleep, not a good time to sleep. And if you were to tread on a nail whilst running away, so an injury, probably wouldn't feel that. And there's another one at the top there that I'd like to just get you to think about, would be if you were to have a lion in the room with you now, would your muscles be tensed or relaxed? And again, just intuitively, if the blood is all, if your heart rate and your breathing is all increased to get muscles to your blood to your muscles to be able to get you away from the lion, to fight the lion, probably makes sense that our muscles are going to be tense, or we'd certainly want to hope so if they're going to get us out of this situation. Okay, and the next thing I'm going to try and introduce is the difference between us as humans and animals in terms of our stress response, because it has some implications for how we deal with it. And I'm a big fan of animal documentaries, and I'm a big David Attenborough fan, who you probably will know. And it was several years ago that when I was first getting to grips with understanding stress physiology, where I was watching a documentary where a wolf was chasing a rabbit. And this story, I tell it all the time because it helps me understand stress physiology, because the wolf was chasing the rabbit, and in that moment, the wolf is in full fight or flight stress physiology, which means that his heart rate is up, his breathing is up, his eyes are wide. He needs to catch the rabbit if he's going to be able to feed his babies, needs to feed his babies to be able to pass on copies of his DNA, evolution, and so the story goes. The rabbit, at the same time, has to be able to tap into the full orchestra of stress physiology that you have just been able to go through with me, which is heart rate's up, breathing's up, eyes are wide. He's got to get away from the wolf and be able to pass on, bring up its babies to be able to pass on copies of its DNA. You know, the fight or flight stress response is designed for that massive burst of energy to be able to save your life, to fight the threat, or to be able to run away from it. So you may have heard of adrenaline or cortisol, or these hormones that kick in to be able to get you glucose and all the energy that you need to be able to do 100% effort to be able to save your life. And you may have even heard of people doing superhuman things when their life depended on it. And that's really an exaggerated version of this. Now, when I was watching this particular episode, when this race between the wolf and the rabbit went on for about 30 seconds, whereby the wolf didn't catch the rabbit. So whilst it's a happy ending for the rabbit, maybe not so much for the wolf, what was really interesting was what happens 2 minutes later. And the wolf just lies down underneath a tree where he goes to sleep, and the rabbit just carries on eating grass as if nothing had happened. What animals are able to do in that instant there, which us as humans have a unique difference, is what's got us to the top of the food chain is our greater brain. And you may have heard that we've got more levels of complex cortex in our brain that enables us to have higher functions and think. Now, that enables us to be able to get to the top of the food chain, but it also enables us to look into the future. It enables us to be able to think about being chased by a lion and amount the full fight or flight stress physiology, not to the lion that's actually in the room, but to the thought of a lion in the room. Just thinking about a threat, just think about that for a second, how amazing that is, that we can think about something and have a full physiological fight or flight stress response where our heart rate comes up, our breathing comes up, our eyes will dilate, our sleep will be not prioritized, our healing will not be prioritized, our libido will not be prioritized, all based on the thought. And if I did this to my students when I'm teaching, is maybe you're sat there now and you're thinking about a lion and you haven't got a fight or flight stress response because it's not real. But I did this to my students where I've got them on the screen, and I told one of them, I pulled them out randomly, said, I'm going to ask you to stand up for a second. I want you to sing to the rest of the group your favorite song. You've got 5 seconds, 4, 3, pick your song, 2, 1, stop. And I didn't ask them to sing, but you can bet that I did give them a little bolt of adrenaline. Made their hands clammy, I made their heart rate raise. The thought of doing something frightening gave them a bolt into their fight or flight stress physiology to kick it into gear. And that's really, really interesting. It has implications for understanding stress physiology, okay? Because every one of us will have different things that's going on that's going to be challenging us in terms of pulling us in different directions. You will have your own, and I'm going to pull up an example here of a metaphorical lion, which could be the fact that you've got and had shoulder pain or back pain, whatever it may be, for a long period of time. And that in of itself is a metaphorical lion that's keeping us in fight or flight stress physiology. Some people will have job issues. Maybe they haven't got a job or they're in a job that they hate. Other people will have failed treatments or money concerns. You know, just fear and anxiety, different explanations. You know, just an example from myself at the moment, or recently, I've been going through a cyber scam, which has resulted in a fraud against my account, which has resulted in me potentially losing a lot of money. And I'm just sat here like this, and the thought, and I can read this on my phone, and at any moment, I have this information that can be putting me into full fight or flight stress physiological response, which is, again, not because of the lion in the room, but the thought of something that I have a real threat about what the meaning of that could have to me. And you will have your own personal cocktail of things that are pulling you in different directions. You've got relationships, you've got job or work concerns, factors. It may be that you've got family issues that are personal but they're going on. But I want you to take a moment here to pause this, and you may even discuss this with your healthcare professional. But I want you to have a go at having a little brainstorm around the things that could be psychological drivers around your life that could be kicking you into fight or flight stress physiology. I wanted to pop those down because there will be certain things in there that will be in your control, and there will be other things that aren't. For example, COVID-19 as a global pandemic, as a small business owner, is an enormous stressor. But there's not an awful lot of control I have about that. And that's one thing that's really important around these ideas, is that, like Robert Sapolsky led in with the start there, is that it is generally a very miserable world. There's bad things happening all the time, but that doesn't necessarily mean to say that tells us anything about how we individually cope and how we process that information. Because when there's things that are out of our control, that is something that we need to be able to park or find a way to deal with that and process on the things that we can do something about. And that's really what this component of our rehabilitation program is going to be all about. Because when we understand and appreciate things, we can action and we can work on it. Because we have fight or flight, and that's everything that we've talked about up to this point, and we need that to be able to survive. When we train, when we go to work, when we have a deadline, we need fight or flight to be able to get shit done. So you will have, and you will depend on fight or flight, and that's something that you should be really grateful that you can do that. And if you train, that's where you want to be kicking that in, because you're trying to get the most out of your sessions, potentially. But something that is important for me to get across here is that there's another end of our stress physiology continuum, and that is what the wolf and rabbit were able to do, which is to be able to turn it off. And that's called rest and digest. And I'm going to pull up a infographic here that I use, that I've taken from Robert Sapolsky, to be able to illustrate that if we, like animals, can turn our stress response on, so we've got a work deadline, we've got training, and we are able to recover, and we can turn it off like the wolf and the rabbit, then our energy resources will be within a balance that we can recover and be able to meet the demands of whatever it is that's being put on us. If, however, we are in fight or flight stress physiology, and we are in 24/7, 100 mile an hour, go, 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 and being pulled from all the different resources, and we're not recovering, and we're not addressing all of these different things that are putting on us, that you've identified on your metaphorical lion. Because remember, we as humans don't have an animal chasing us anymore, but we do have a mobile phone, and we do have constant exposure to psychological stresses that none of us can avoid. And if we can't switch that off, and we can't flip to rest and digest just like the wolf and the rabbit are able to do, over time, what this red trace illustrates is that we exceed our ability to be able to meet the demands that our life places on us. And all of those systems that we talked about at the start that were not important when there was a lion chasing you. So I will jog your memory of it now. We talked about how your sleep is not important, your healing is not important, your immune system is not prioritized, your libido is not prioritized, your digestive system. All of these systems, if for long enough this goes on, and for some people it will be years where they're living in this full throttle lifestyle, those systems will ultimately become symptoms, and our body will express them in a way that is going to make us need to change our behavior. People who have, and you may be experiencing this, from the research, we know that people who have ongoing aches and pains and different health challenges will sleep less. And again, when we bring this back to stress physiology, if we're in fight or flight stress physiology indefinitely, we said it's not a priority to sleep. And insomnia is something that comes really, really commonly with this. If we look at our digestive system, maybe you've had, or someone who's had IBS, which is irritable bowel syndrome, which is a diagnosis of elimination. You rule out all of the potential causes of why you've got loose and uncommon irregular stools. And again, if we can bring the factor that we're in fight or flight stress physiology, which isn't going to be prioritizing our digestive system, then that makes sense as well. Lost libido, if it's going to be going on for long periods of time, that's going to be where it's going to be expressed as a symptom. And to be able to connect something that's probably much more obvious to you will be what we said initially was muscular tensions. Being able to shift blood to the muscles to get you away from the lion or to fight the lion is going to help you in an acute stress response. But if this goes on for a long period of time and we can't switch that off, then that global tension, that holding tension in muscles, then can be a really big part of the picture of perpetual aches and pains that won't settle down. Maintaining tension in muscles, that can be something that we have some control over, trying to downregulate. And again, that makes sense if we are looking at this through this idea of fight or flight versus the other end of our energy continuum, which is rest and relax. And that's really important. I want to be able to illustrate that that's really what we're talking about here, with the difference between acute stress, which we need, and chronic stress, which is something that has an enormous list of implications on our health. And that's really what Robert Sapolsky was talking about at the start, is where religion, which is every human culture has evolved anywhere in the world, to be able to have attributing all the terrible things in life that happen to a greater being, because it's incredibly stress reducing, and that is important for our health, to be able to have ways to be able to shift to rest and digest, where we see animals who are able to do it because they can't think and they can't have that complex person that's attached to being able to think about the future. If I was to give that an image, that would look a little bit like this. We talked about adrenaline and cortisol that you may have heard of. That's what kicks into gear in fight or flight stress physiology and mobilizes all the energy you need to be able to train, to be able to fight the lion off. But those are also what's going to keep us in. If that's kept on for a prolonged period and we're not able to switch that off, mood swings, depression, memory, sleep, appetite, all of these may or may not be more relevant for yourself, but the impact of those then on your muscles are sore, sensitive, maybe deconditioned, and that's where your nervous system then is protecting you with a pain experience in the back. And this is a connection that, in my experience, most people haven't had this explained as to how stress physiology can impact your neck pain or your back pain. And that is one of the most important things I want to get across in this session, is to be able to make that meaningful. Because a lot of people, when they think about stress relieving things, a lot of people will say, well, I'm not stressed. I'm not stressed. Stop telling me I'm stressed. I'm not stressed. And that's really an important distinction, is to be able to say it's not stress we're talking about here. We're talking about stress physiology, because you will be on one end of the continuum or the other, and being able to appreciate that if we spend the majority of our time in fight or flight, as opposed to rest and digest, then it is going to potentially lead to our body telling us that we need to be able to hit the other side of the energy continuum, just like animals intuitively do. Okay? And that's what we're covering and we're going to think about after this session, because I want you to think about what would happen if an African lion cub came into the room. And unless you have a particular fear of cuddly animals, then you would probably not freak out, and you would probably even go and pet it. And the metaphor that I'm introducing there is to be able to turn an African lion into a lion cub. And that's really one of the processes that we're looking to do through this rehabilitation, is to turn and help you support whatever is potentially on your metaphorical African lion, through learning more about these things, to turn it into a lion cub that requires less protection. It's less of a threat, and we can actually even engage with the process because we understand more about it, and when we can action it. And to that end, I want to offer you to think about some typical things that people might say are stress relieving activities. And the first things that may come to head may be yoga, it may be meditation. And for a lot of people, that is a really, really good idea, and it can be life-changing in being able to find a practice that you find you're able to engage with. And what it's also for me to be able to do at this point is to say that you may be like me, and you may be a bit of a fidget, which means that you can't sit still, and even sitting still is stressful. And so doing meditation, or doing mindfulness, like using the Headspace app, just simply doesn't work for you. And in fact, it could be the complete opposite. It could be causing you stress. So what I want you to have a little think about, and stop here again to be able to write these down, because you can take these to your healthcare professional to be able to think about what it is that puts you into flow. What is it that when you do it, nothing else matters? Because for me, it's playing a musical instrument. When life's busy, when I was working through my studies and I was having lots of these psychological pressures like exams and and the concern around those things. Being able to turn to a musical instrument was something that still to this day is an incredibly powerful part of my own management of my stress physiology. Another that I use regularly is getting outside into nature. Walking, being in mountains really helps me be able to unwind. And you will have things that are going to be relevant and meaningful to you. It could be reading, it could be seeing your friends, it could be yoga, it could be meditation. And I want you to try and have a think of 4 to 5 things that if you had half a day where you haven't got the kids, you haven't got work, you haven't got university, you haven't got training, you've got an empty block of time just for you. And I want to challenge you to have a think about what is it that you would do that is just for the pure joy of you doing it. Because that's going to be the most likely thing that we're going to need to get into your daily life again, because it may be something that you love doing, and when you look at it, you actually have stopped doing it, either out of the demands pulling you left, right and center, or just because you didn't realize that you enjoyed it so much, and we need to be able to have a reminder. Another one for me is being able to have coffee and read in a cafe. I can get lost for hours doing that, and that is again something that I can use to be able to balance my life out when things are getting busy, which they will do for all of us at different points. Okay, and another example for myself, because it will help you have some ideas to jot down and then take to your healthcare professional and discuss, is, you know, I recently had a period of neck pain that was so notable and so significant to me that it would stop me doing my regular training. So one of the main ways that I utilize this as a concept in terms of trying to balance and looking at the different factors that is filling up my metaphorical lion, was to be able to get back out and do walking in mountains a few times a week. And that's where the understanding and bringing these things into actually action them become important, because that's what you're going to need to be able to do. And I want to be able to support you to be able to get back to doing some of the things that you can identify that really brings you flow. Okay, with the clinical reasoning of balancing stress physiology, rest and digest, so that you can actually be able to build up your reserves to be able to go the rest of the time. You know, it's a lot of people miss the fact that when we're training, when we're working hard in the gym, that's when we're breaking things down. That's when we're using the stress response to be able to burn energy, and that's what we call catabolic. It's breaking down. When we are in the resting or building ourselves back up, that's the anabolic part. That's where we're building up the reserves through sleeping well and being able to explore ways to relax to give us the best way of building up our reserves. So to help you understand this, I want you to have a go at jotting down, or even just trying to maybe review this video and see if you can explain to somebody else the fight or flight stress response. See if you can explain to them, what would you do when an African lion comes into the room? And as you did at the start here, you will be able to get across or get from someone that you know that they probably want to fight it, they probably want to run away or scream, and then you're able to explain the stress response. Also see if you can explain what wouldn't be important. So your sleep, so your digestion, so feeling pain, so libido, those systems. And then if you're able to do that, see if you can connect to my wolf and rabbit story. Because if you are able to do that and you're able to understand it, we can see that we need that stress response, but just like the wolf and rabbit, we also need to be able to turn that off. And that's really challenging for us when we've got different things that are keeping us in a stress response from purely thinking about it. Money, relationships, concerns over our health, whatever it is that may be in your life, being able to identify that could be keeping us in stress physiology for a prolonged period of time, which means that sleep, muscular tensions, digestion, healing, pain, all of those things can ultimately then become part of the picture. And what you're going to then be doing is, either with my support on your own through your own self-discovery with a healthcare professional, is bringing back in a little bit of the things and the pieces that you enjoy. So whether it was from the 5 things that you jotted down earlier, breathing practice. You know, there's simple techniques like, if we appreciate that when a lion comes into the room, that our heart rate goes up and our breathing comes up. Well, just consciously having a practice that can slow our breathing down can really help us to be able to shift our nervous system into rest and relax. And of course, if you wanted to go train and you wanted to do, you know, being able to utilize the stress response, that's where we want to be able to be like the wolf and rabbit and be able to work and exercise really hard. But if we're not able to, if we've got a lot of psychological stress impacting us and we're not able to do the physical activity, that's where we see the long-term implications of chronic stress. So just being able to have a breathing practice where you're able to breathe slowly. You may have a martial art that you're interested in. It could be yoga. You've hopefully jotted down some things that you are able to do, and you could do them daily. You could have them just as emergency tactics for when life gets busy and we're feeling a bit overwhelmed. But that's really important, because that could be as simple as just starting doing something again that you stopped doing that you really enjoy. Okay. I hope this has been helpful and that this has liberated you to be able to start being able to do some things again that you maybe thought you couldn't do, and under the prescription of this is, you know, I'm doing this because I really enjoy it. Going for a walk, reading, playing a musical instrument, whatever it may be, because as the overriding perspective of our program, this part is where we're trying to impact our stress physiology.